You are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Welcome back to the 6th episode of the Social Media and Politics podcast, which is all about bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, PhD student at the University of Copenhagen. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, we've just launched on iTunes, so if you like the podcast, please show us a little love by subscribing and leaving a short review in the iTunes store. It really helps spread the word. There's a short video on how to leave a review on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Social Media and Politics Podcast. All right, I am so excited to talk to today's guest. As a researcher of social media and elections, it's my job to look at political campaigns and try to figure out how politicians are using social media to mobilize and persuade voters. But in just a moment, we'll be hearing about exactly how campaign strategy goes down from an insider. My guest today is Chasen Campbell, Vice President of Client Strategy at Harris Media, a communications and digital marketing firm based out of the great city of Austin, Texas. Harris Media has run online strategy campaigns for a number of high-profile U.S. political elections. Most recently, that includes Kentucky Senator Rand Paul's presidential bid in 2016, but also Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's election campaign in 2014, not to mention a number of other politicians you may have heard of, like Ted Cruz, Sarah Palin, and even non-U.S. actors like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Nigel Farage's UK Independence Party. Joining me now via Skype from Austin, Texas, is Harris Media's Vice President of Client Strategy, Chasen Campbell. You can follow Chasen at Chasen Campbell on Twitter and check out some of his work at www.harrismediallc.com. Chasen, welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So, can you tell us a little bit about Harris Media? What does the company do, and what's your role there?
Yeah, so, we're, like you said, a communications and advertising firm out of Austin. Most of our clients are political in nature, whether that's campaigns or advocacy groups or, super PACs like you hear about. And we do all of their digital advertising, their social media. We build websites. We have a team of awesome graphic designers here that do all of our creative in-house, from photos, GIFs, short videos, and we're about 40 people strong in our firm here. We do work, like you said, all across America, but internationally as well.
Cool. And what I'm interested in is, and I was looking at your bio a little bit on the website, is microtargeting. So how does that work exactly, from someone on the ground, so to say?
Yeah, well, a lot of campaigns now understand the power that digital has for speaking to a very narrow audience on an issue that they care about, and using, we worked on Senator Portman's campaign in Ohio this year, and he went on to one of the largest Senate victories, I think, in recent memory. He beat his opponent, the former governor, by over 1 million votes. And Senator Portman cared a lot about micro-targeting and had about 7 to 9 different audiences. And how that works is, a lot of times it's done in conjunction with a polling and canvassing firm that will actually go out and speak to people and see what issue moves them the most. And then based on those results, they'll go and create a model of who else is most likely to also agree with this person. Mm-hmm. And depending on the size of the state, that could be as few as, 50,000 people, or that could be as large as 1 million people. And from there, what we do is we take those audiences, and in the past for reaching them on Facebook and Twitter, you had to go and do what's called an append, and actually go and find their email addresses and then upload those to the networks. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of issues with that because, the email address you might have matched might not exist anymore, or it might be for a different person named John Doe, or they don't have an account on the social network with that email address because, I don't know about yourself, but I have 4 different email addresses. So maybe I used a different one. In the time since, it's gone a lot better, whereas I actually don't even need your email address in America to find you online anymore. I can take, Chasen Campbell in Austin, Texas, just using my name and home mailing address, and upload that to Facebook and match you in less than 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. So, and that's actually led to, match rates of 70 to 80%. So we take now essentially the voter file. The canvassing firm takes the model of who's most likely to fall into these audiences. For Senator Portman, for example, heroin was a big issue because there's a big epidemic with heroin addiction in the Northeast in America right now. And so we found people that really cared about what was being done on that issue, pulled their information from the voter file, uploaded them to Facebook and Twitter, and then Google, and made sure that the majority of the messages they saw were about the senator's work on curbing the heroin epidemic.
Right. And so how exactly do you target those people online? It's a mix with these databases, and then you target them on Facebook. Exactly how?
So it's all anonymized in the back end. I can't see that I'm actually targeting, Chase Campbell, for example. But it does match directly to your profile. So after uploading an audience of, say 1 million people, if the match rate's good, I will then get an actual audience I can advertise to on Facebook of probably 700 to 800,000 people. And it's just people in that list that I uploaded that Facebook actually went and found.
Interesting. And how much does that cost? I know from posting ads for the podcast that you have to pay to boost a post. Is it the similar logic?
We go a few steps further. Boosting is probably the most basic thing that you could do on Facebook. We take a lot of video content and split test the content that we're running to find which one's actually performing best with the audience. Digital budgets in American politics are continuing to grow as the majority of the electorate spends most of its time online. So, your traditional TV advertising has seen a hit in recent years with that shift going to digital. So this year, some of the larger senatorial campaigns were spending upwards of, $2 to $4 million on online advertising, reaching these audiences. And there's other fees involved with that. You have to pay your polling firm, and you have to pay your database a subscription. The cost can get up there if you really want to run a full-fledged digital operation.
Interesting, because we on episode 1 of this podcast, we had the social media coordinator for the European Parliament, and we were talking about their Snapchat account. And for them, everything was essentially free, just like a personal account. So how do the costs differ across the different social media platforms?
So it all depends on your strategy at the end of the day, and the strategy changes a lot. I think in the beginning of a campaign for any candidate, there's a couple of areas that they need to hit first, and those are growing their actual audience on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, because the larger audience that you actually have from a fan perspective, that means the more people you can reach on an organic basis without having to pay. And that's way early on in the campaign. As you get to a few months out of the election and you're really focusing on every single dollar going to persuasion, one reason why it gets more expensive is because those 700, 800,000 people in a micro-target audience that you have might not be your fans, right? Because you haven't gone and found them yet. So in that case, they're never seeing anything that you post organically unless their friend shares it. And you can't control what they see organically. I couldn't control that if someone in our heroin addiction audience only saw heroin stuff from an organic perspective. That can only be done on a paid perspective. So that's where the cost comes in. And with newer things like Snapchat, I think a lot of people do try to do as much as they can for free because the advertising there is a much different model. Snapchat's video ads, for example, are far more expensive on a per unit basis than Facebook or Twitter's. And I imagine that'll change in the coming years as Snapchat grows from an audience user base. But they only recently actually released an advertising platform to actually yourself go in and do that. So I think as Snapchat matures as a platform, you'll probably see a lot more, user promotion going on.
And how important is it to kind of skirt costs, I guess, to have your fan base share your content or use your geo-filter or this sort of kind of citizen campaigning? Is there a lot of effort going into that?
From our firm, yes. I mean, we pride ourselves on the creativity of the actual content that we create, and we think it's important that what our clients are actually putting out there online is actually engaging with voters and is something that they want to share back. I think a lot of campaigns see digital as a checkbox still that they have to just mark off, and
Right.
that means they just take their 15 or 30-second television ad and they put it on Facebook and they think, oh, they're online now. We put our message out there and we're doing the job, which isn't the case. I mean, I think back to 2013 when we had just signed on with Senate Majority Leader McConnell for his reelection campaign in Kentucky. And, we that year started posting cat gifs and memes about Harry Reid on his Facebook page. And, it wasn't like we suggested that and instantly got approval that night. There was some time it took there. But once we got the campaign comfortable with that, I think some of that stuff that we did was the most engaging stuff that we actually put out there for the senator. And, the internet's so different, I think, from any other medium because it's very easy to close out whatever you're seeing, right? You can't close your television ad out. So, I mean, if you're really not engaging and creative, someone can just easily move on to the next thing. And so it's very important, and it's why the majority of people that work at our firm, are very, it's very young, very creative. Everyone here uses social media personally, so that, I mean, we're using the things that we see in our own personal life that work well and applying that to our candidates.
So I want to ask because, I mean, you guys have such a impressive list of people that you've worked with. So from the latest presidential campaign to Senate races, gubernatorial races, special interest groups as well. How do you approach the communication strategies for each campaign? Is there a sort of underlying approach that you have, or do you have to tailor each campaign based on?
Yeah. It's different for every campaign. I mean, take a regular campaign, for example, with actual candidates. If you're the incumbent, the messages that you're putting out there are probably going to be much more different compared to a primary challenger who's never held office before and is trying to be an insurgent candidate. And if you're, a Republican in Connecticut, that doesn't mean you hold the same views as a Republican in Texas. That's for sure. So the issues that are important and the extremity to which you message on those issues changes, but also just the nature of the candidate in general. I mean, if you're Senator Portman and you've been in the Senate for a term already, then you're probably going to speak more towards the work that you've done and the work you want to continue doing, and not so much about how the other guy's terrible, right? So that changes a lot based on geography and the situation of the candidate.
And speaking of geography, I mean, you've also done some work with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel and Nigel Farage's UK Independence Party. So what's the difference between running a digital campaign in the U.S. and then one in another country? I mean, do you take into account differences in social media use patterns, or how exactly does that work?
In terms of how people across the world compared to America use the internet, it's all growing everywhere. So they're taking Israel, for example, there aren't drastic differences. In some countries you might find someone that uses Twitter more often than Facebook. So there's things like that to consider. But I think the biggest differences between an American political campaign and a foreign country like Israel that we worked in is that the cycle is very different. So in America, people began running for president as soon as the 2014 midterms were over. I mean, Ted Cruz announced, I think, at the end of February. We announced with Senator Paul in March of 2015, and the election's been going on ever since then, and people are exhausted.
Right.
In Israel, you can't even campaign until, I believe, the last 3 months before the election date. So the actual lead-up time that you have is much shorter, and so the time that you have to actually persuade voters, that window is a lot narrower. So it's increasingly important, I think, in those types of situations with coalition governments and smaller election periods to even have, perhaps more engaging content because you don't have the benefit of a 2-year period to speak to someone.
So you view that as a benefit to sort of, I guess, have things in phases, whereas in a different country with a shorter campaign period, it's really intense, driving engagement from the get go.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so how do you? By the way, just for our listeners, on your website harrismediallc.com, you have some really cool case studies of the Mitch McConnell race, for example, or Ted Cruz in 2012. So I'd recommend our listeners to go check those out. They're kind of like PowerPoint slides of the different strategies you guys have been doing. But if you're really going for engagement, if you really want to get people off the bat into the campaign, what do you do to drive engagement?
The internet's a great place, and things that are popular on the internet change every single day. So I think that being quick enough to latch on to what's trending at that moment, and for some of the more traditional older voters, keep it in the frame of reference of whatever issue was, what is important at that time. I think all of that is important, and the attention span of voters online is very small. And people are, every app you have, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, you're scrolling. You're just moving through your phone really quickly. And you're probably stopping on an individual post for all of 1 or 2 seconds unless you actually care about it and engaging with it. So I think in that sense, it's very important to get a message across that's short, easy to understand, and is entertaining. And, obviously, I think memes are a very good way to do that. There was a funny one for Senator McConnell about Harry Reid and losing the gun control battle in the Senate in 2013 that I can send you, that did really well. But I think those are the important pieces of the equation: short, easy to understand, and engaging. And if you're not catching someone within those first 1 to 3 seconds that they actually see it, take it like a traditional TV ad, for example, when the important message is at the end of the ad, the end of the 30 seconds, you've already missed them entirely, and there's nothing that's going to resonate there.
Interesting. What's it like working with some of these high-profile politicians? Do they give you free reins to do what you want, or do they tell you this is what we want you to do, or is it sort of a collaborative effort between the two groups?
Yeah, again, everyone's different. Senator Paul certainly handled his campaign much differently than Senator McConnell did. Senator Paul, on his presidential campaign, was very active in what was happening online and was providing ideas all the time. There's a YouTube video on his campaign channel where he destroys the tax code, and he puts it through a wood chipper, he takes a chainsaw to it, and he sets it on fire. And that was actually his idea. That we executed it, but it was actually his idea. In that sense, on that campaign, it was a lot of fun because the senator himself was very involved. And then I think about also, we were actually in D.C. the day that he filibustered on the privacy, NSA conversation going on in America, and we were actually just filming a couple videos for the campaign that morning with him. And then he, went to session in the Senate and didn't tell anyone what he was going to do. And all of a sudden people said, oh, wow, he's filibustering now. And we had to quickly go and get everything put together for him. So, that was a fun day too, because, it caught us off guard, but it also gave us a lot of leeway to be creative and help spread the message of what he was doing while he was filibustering. So more campaigns are more guarded. I think you traditionally see that more for people who've been elected to multiple terms and they understand what it is, or they think they understand what it is they want to do online, and they want to keep you more boxed in and just execute what they want to do. But, I think as we get to 2018 and 2020, you'll see more and more campaigns kind of turn over the keys, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking at Harris Media's clients, there's a common thread running through them, which is they're all on the right side of the political spectrum. They're all quite conservative. So my question is, do you only work with campaigns that have this ideological bend, or are you guys for hire from the left as well?
For political candidates, we typically only work with Republicans. But even that means something different to a person depending on where they're from and how they think. When we work for, Senator Cruz, everyone in Texas, very conservative, love that. And then when we turn around and work for Senator McConnell, it's, oh, he's not a Republican, why are you working for him? Mm-hmm. So, the opinion changes based on the actual person rather than the letter next to their name. But yes, typically Republicans.
So when you're working with these campaigns, you're overseeing some pretty hefty budgets, as you were saying. Digital spending is increasing. And it says on your website that you work with partners at Google, Twitter, and Facebook. So what's that like? What are you guys actually talking about?
So, we spend a lot of time crafting strategies. For Senator Paul's presidential campaign, we spent a day up in Mountain View at Google's headquarters with the team that we work with at Google regularly, and we just spent 3 or 4 hours in a room just brainstorming things that the senator could do in his campaign, from everything related to digital. We value those relationships, and there are some very, very smart people working at these companies that are helping us to execute the strategy that we're coming up with, and in some cases even help us form the strategy that we're coming up with, because they understand their platforms better than anyone does because they work at these companies. And so on a very regular basis, I mean, I would say almost daily, we're speaking to our teams. Google and Facebook and Twitter actually have teams of Republicans and Democrats that actually help to facilitate all the advertising.
And what's in it for them?
Well, what's in it for them is they want our money. So if they're helping us come up with good strategy and entertaining ideas, it's more likely we're going to spend more money on their networks, which is better for their bottom lines.
So it's not about improving quality of democracy or any of those features. It's ultimately market-driven, basically.
There's capitalism at the end of the day.
All right. So I want to ask you, we talked a little bit about micro-targeting, but analytics. So these sort of numbers that you get from how many people liked your page, responded to a post. How important are analytics to a digital campaign?
Extremely important if you're spending a lot of money. I mean, we report, depending on the how often the client wants them, but also the money that's being spent. We report back on analytics weekly, so often more often than just a weekly basis, to show them what's working best. I mean, it goes far beyond how large is your page or how many people have visited your website. I think one of the most important forms of advertising you can actually do online is a search ad, because that's the one time where a voter is actually indicating that they want to receive some sort of information back on what they look for. And so, I mean, that's the most persuasive time you can reach someone. And so we report back regularly on the number of times someone searched for Senator Portman versus the number of times someone searched for his opponent. And if we're seeing spikes there, maybe that indicates there's something we need to look at that's going to be important to the race. For the video advertising, it's especially important, I think, because the beauty of digital is I can run 10 different versions of the same thing that are all slightly different and see which one's performing better. And we did some things that we're going to release for Senator Portman as his case study in a little bit here. But we did some things over the summer for him for his video advertising, where we were editing his YouTube videos to try to catch people's attention before they actually had an opportunity to click the skip button on the ad. And I mean, drastically, by over 14 percentage points, increased the view rate and decreased by, I think, 6, 7, 8 cents. The average cost per view that we were seeing on those videos. So we were able to keep people watching the video longer, so the message was getting across, and it was also costing us less per individual person viewing it because people were less incentivized to click the skip button. So all of that comes back at the end of the day, and we put them together for the campaigns and provide our subjective insight on what it actually means for them at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. So I was just teaching a lecture on Obama's 2012 campaign, and what their strategists were doing in terms of the connection between digital media and traditional media, broadcasting and television, was that they would try to shock the system by incorporating conversations on Twitter that would spill over into mass media coverage. So is that part of your strategy as well, trying to get that exposure through Fox News?
Absolutely. Yeah, we absolutely try to incorporate getting earned media based off the things that we're doing online. And I think Twitter is actually one of the best places to do that, because you can actually take your lists of known journalists in DC and New York, wherever, and target just those people on Twitter with a message, so that the people that are actually writing the stories at the end of the day are the ones seeing your ad, and you're encouraging some earned media responses. And they're beyond just targeting specific journalists. If what you're doing is really engaging, you'll get a lot of earned media. And I think back to Senator Paul when he did a all-day live stream on the ground in Iowa during his presidential campaign. That got a lot of coverage because no one else had done that. And he, at the end of the day, had gotten a little frustrated and he cursed on the live stream, and that got a lot of coverage. And it turned out to be a funny moment for the campaign. But it also helped him get a lot of earned media, in a race that Donald Trump was pretty much taking all the air out of the room from that perspective. So I think that's important for a campaign. Every bit of free coverage you can get is coverage you don't have to pay for.
And so we've got a few academic listeners who'd be interested, I think, to hear about the role of social scientists in these big time U.S. campaigns. So it's no secret that the Democrats have sort of led the charge in using social science methods to run experiments for political ads. What about Republicans? I mean, you've got this creative group of people at Harris Media, but are you using some sort of social science methods to see what's working and what's not working?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really worked on a campaign, a Republican campaign that had someone perhaps with that title or position. But from our perspective and what we're bringing to the campaign is actually looking at the analytics that are coming back from all the advertising we're doing and all the things that we're putting out there, and using that to actually predict what's going to work best next for the campaign. But in terms of actually having someone dedicated where their sole job is maybe, measuring sentiment on conversations online or predicting the next thing someone's going to talk about, not a lot of that.
All right. Well, you can leave that to us. But peering into the crystal ball a little bit, what platform should we look out for in future campaigns? Is it newer social media like Snapchat, Periscope? Are they going to be game changers, or is it sort of the giants of Facebook and Twitter that will continue to dominate?
Well, unfortunately, I think Twitter's seeing a lot of struggle right now, and I think President-elect Trump might actually be a good thing for them because Twitter's his preferred platform of communication. But as it relates to them actually being able to compete with Facebook and Google, I mean, no one's going to be able to compete with them based on the sheer audience size that they have. I mean, Google reaches 95% of the internet and Facebook has 90% of the American voters. So, I mean, actually being able to compete with them, I don't know that anyone's going to be able to do that. Snapchat is going to be important, I think, because it's very similar to when Facebook was in its infancy and millennials were growing up with Facebook as their first, platform for social media. Now you have people that are 14, 15, 16 that are going to be able to vote in the next presidential election, where Snapchat is their first social platform that they're using. And I mean, they haven't released audience numbers in a while. I think the last one they released was they were over 100 million users, which is pretty significant. But I think Snapchat will continue to grow, and as they get closer to an IPO and become a profitable company that's not just based on VC funding and releases more and cool ad units, I think Snapchat will continue to become more important. However, Instagram just released a lot of the similar features that Snapchat has, and Instagram has, I think, over 5 times the users, and shocker, Facebook owns them. So, Facebook, I think, is doing as much as it can to stave off competition from these newer networks that are doing things that maybe they didn't think of first, by incorporating them into platforms where perhaps a larger percentage of their audience is younger, like Instagram. So, Instagram has a more powerful advertising platform than Snapchat because it's Facebook's advertising platform. It's the exact same, and you can upload lists in the exact same way and micro-target people on Instagram just like you can on Facebook. And they just released live video, which, as we all know, is becoming a monster online. I mean, live video is all I see now on my own personal Facebook feed, and the campaigns used it to their benefit all the time. So it'll be interesting, but I think the giants will remain.
Okay, interesting. So last question, which social media platform is your personal favorite?
Twitter.
Twitter.
That's my personal favorite. I'm obsessed with Twitter. If you go read through my Twitter account, it's probably nothing but politics and the sad state of Texas Longhorn football. But Twitter is my personal favorite. I think anyone in this office will tell you if they look at me and I'm on my phone, I'm probably on Twitter. I'm obsessed with it. I get all of my news from Twitter, and that's the one I love to use the most. I can't remember the last time I posted a photo on Instagram or used Periscope. But yeah, Twitter's where it's at. But I I begrudgingly acknowledge that it will not become the giant that Facebook and Google are.
All right, Chasen, I've got 1,000,001 other questions for you, but we're all out of time. Thanks so much for taking the time out to share your insights with us.
Thank you.
I've just been speaking with Chasen Campbell, VP of Client Strategy at Harris Media. You can follow him on Twitter at Chasen Campbell or Harris Media at Harris Media and their webpage, harrismediallc.com. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. Please pass through the iTunes store, leave us a short review, and help spread the word. Big thanks to Copenhagen University for the studio, Earfunk for the jams, and Peter Orbeck for editing. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Copenhagen. See you next time.